Chapter 7, Ephraim is shattered. Chapter 7 is one of the more difficult chapters of Isaiah to interpret for the last days. The details of the chapter are simple enough. God tells Isaiah to meet King Ahaz outside Jerusalem, where the king is preparing for an attack by Ephraim and Syria. Isaiah goes there, and he tells the king not to worry about Jerusalem, that God himself will defend it, if the king will have faith. But of course, King Ahaz, who is so wicked that he's already caused at least 2 of his children to be sacrificed in the fires of Baal, refuses to trust God. So Isaiah gives him a sign that he may know that Isaiah's words are sure. A young woman, who is not identified, will conceive and bear a son, and the son shall be called Emmanuel. Further, before the child will know to choose right from wrong, both Ephraim and Syria will lose their wicked kings. But then Isaiah, seeing Ahaz's hardness of heart, predicts that God will bring upon the people suffering like they've never known. The suffering will not come from those 2 kings, but from a 3rd king, mightier than them all, the king of Assyria. In the last days, this prophecy will be fulfilled again, as Isaiah is using this as a type and shadow of things to come. But these things won't occur until after the destructions found in chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 of Isaiah's timeline. In the midst of all those catastrophes, Isaiah tells us that this new threat will arise. 2 wicked leaders will invade and make war in the land of the covenant people. It appears that these 2 leaders will themselves come from covenant people. One of them will come from Ephraim, and the other from a nearby kindred people. In Isaiah's day, the armies of Ephraim and Syria had already killed 120,000 men in Judah and carried away 200,000 women and children into captivity. People in Jerusalem, which had not yet been attacked, now trembled in fear like trees shaking in the wind. The threat from these 2 armies was a very real threat, an existential threat to those covenant people who had not escaped to build up Zion. In the latter days, we do not know who these 2 invading armies will be, except that at least some of them will appear to come from other covenant people. And of course, in the background, a much larger threat will be looming: the Assyrian and his unstoppable army. Again, Isaiah told King Ahaz not to fear for Jerusalem, that God himself would save it. Then he gave Ahaz a sign so that he might trust his words. He said that a maiden, probably there with the king at the time, would conceive and bear a son, who would be called Emmanuel. Of course, for the sign to convince King Ahaz that he could trust God, its fulfillment would have to be fairly immediate, as the threat itself was immediate. Thus, as we later learn, this one prophecy will have 3 different fulfillments: one in Ahaz's day, one in the meridian of time with Christ, and one in the last days, which is the ultimate focal point of all of Isaiah's words. By the way, the word virgin, which is used in verse 14, is translated from the Hebrew word alma, which means young woman, maiden, or in the right context, virgin. But elsewhere, when Isaiah refers to a virgin, he uses the word betula, which specifically means virgin. But here, alma is the perfect word, as it refers in one fulfillment to a young woman, in another fulfillment to the Virgin Mary, and in a third, as we shall see, to a figurative woman in the last days prophesied of by John the Revelator. The first fulfillment probably happened with the birth of Ahaz's son, Hezekiah. God was definitely with Hezekiah, as this young man later exercised faith sufficient to turn the sun back 10 degrees in the sky. He exercised faith sufficient to destroy 185,000 enemy troops in one night, and he exercised sufficient faith that his own life was extended by 15 years. Truly, as the name Emmanuel implies, God was with this young man. The second fulfillment came with the miraculous birth of Christ. And the third fulfillment will come in the last days, when the Lord raises up a son, a quote, a man-child, as John the Revelator calls him. This man-child will come forth from a woman, the same woman that Joseph Smith said will be, quote, the church of God in the last days. This man will ultimately be raised up to God on his throne, as Isaiah was, and he will eventually, quote, rule all nations with a rod of iron. This is the latter-day servant of Christ, a holy prophet who will be called up and anointed by Christ himself. Going back now, Isaiah says that after the threat of the two smaller local kings has been removed, then God will bring in the Assyrian and his armies. These armies will be like bees, swarming in and doing battle with the flies or armies of Egypt. As we see throughout the prophecies of Isaiah, Egypt is used as a type of the latter-day superpower, which is almost certainly America. In other words, Isaiah is saying that in the last days, the land of the covenant people will be overrun by warring armies, and that the armies of the Assyrian invader will win. Only those who have been led out by the Spirit, those who have, quote, escaped, as Isaiah tells us, will avoid these awful calamities. For at that time, truly, the cities of the covenant people will be, quote, wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And at this time, we're only halfway through the timeline Isaiah gives us for the last days. If you'd like to learn more about Isaiah's prophecies for our day, check out the website, thewordsofisaiah.com. I'll try to answer your questions there and show you how to get the book, The Words of Isaiah, that explains his prophecies as they apply to the covenant people in our day. I'm Curtis Taylor with The Words of Isaiah.